Chosen one, this message didn't find you by accident. God led you here for a reason. You may not even realize it yet, but heaven has been watching you closely. Not for how loud you could be, not for how well you could perform, but for how quietly you could endure, how faithfully you could stand, and how deeply you could trust. This is your confirmation. The tests you went through weren't ordinary. They were designed to expose what was inside of you. And while others may have given up, lashed out, or betrayed their process, you stayed loyal, stayed quiet, and cried your way through. Heaven saw it all. And now, heaven is rewarding what no one else applauded. Let's break this down in 7 divine chapters so you understand exactly what you've been through and what's coming next. Before we dive deep, make sure you like, share, and subscribe. Because this message isn't just content, it's a divine confirmation sent straight from the throne room for the chosen ones. And to everyone who's been supporting through super thanks, may God bless you beyond measure. Your faith, your presence, your loyalty, they are seen. They are felt. And heaven is taking note of it all. If your spirit resonates with this frequency, type loyal in the comments right now. That's not just a word. It's a spiritual signal, a declaration to heaven that you endured, that you didn't fold, that you stayed faithful through fire, silence, and heartbreak. Not everyone will make it to the end of this message. Only those who know what it means to suffer in silence, to remain loyal when it cost them everything, and to cry tears that no one else understood. This isn't a message you listen to once. This is a living word, a divine scroll that reveals more each time your soul leans in. Watch it again when you need strength. Replay it when you need clarity. Because every time you hear it, heaven will highlight a new piece of the test you passed and the reward that's now being released. You didn't just survive, you passed. And now your elevation is not just coming, it's been approved. Let's dive deeper. Chapter 1, the test you couldn't explain. Chosen one. There are some tests that God will walk you through quietly. Not because He wants you to suffer in silence, but because the weight of the test is too sacred to be shared with just anyone. This wasn't a trial you could tweet about. This wasn't the kind of battle where you could ask for advice. This was the kind of refining fire that had no name, no warning, and no instruction manual. It was holy. It was hidden. And it was hard. You found yourself in a place where nothing made sense. The people around you couldn't understand. Some walked away. Others misread your silence as weakness or your distance as pride. But the truth was you were in a war zone of the soul, facing invisible opposition, carrying burdens in your chest that had no words, praying prayers that only came out in groans and tears. You were misunderstood. You were emotionally exhausted. And still, you kept going. You showed up. You remained faithful. You stayed in position when it would have been easier to quit. Why? Because your loyalty wasn't based on outcomes or validation. You weren't serving God for applause. You were rooted in something deeper, covenant. This wasn't the kind of test you could study for or prepare for intellectually. This was the kind of test that revealed your core. It pulled out the real you, the you that could be trusted when no one was looking. The you that would keep believing even when nothing was working. The you that would remain loyal when everything inside of you was screaming to run. God allowed this test not to expose your flaws, but to confirm your faith. And when everything else was falling apart, God was holding you together, even when you didn't feel it, even when you questioned Him, even when you wondered if you were being punished. He wasn't punishing you. He was purifying you. Some things had to be stripped away. Certain mindsets had to break. Old habits had to die. People who were never assigned to your future had to fall off. Not because you were cursed, but because you were being consecrated. And God doesn't promote what He hasn't first proven. The people around you didn't know what you were really carrying. They couldn't see the calling forming in the dark. They couldn't perceive the oil being pressed from your pain. And that was intentional. Because this test wasn't for public consumption. It wasn't for likes, shares, or recognition. It was for heaven's record. It was about proving who you really are in the spirit. This was not a performance test. It was a character test. God wasn't checking your ability to shout in public. He was checking your ability to stand in private. He wasn't looking for how well you could speak to others. He was looking at how well you could hear him when nothing else made sense. And the most powerful part of it all. You passed. You didn't pass it by being perfect. You passed it by being faithful. You passed it by showing up in prayer when no one else was praying for you. You passed it by continuing to worship when everything inside you felt broken. You passed it by not quitting when you had every reason to. Now heaven has recorded it. The secret endurance. The silent suffering. The quiet obedience. All of it has been written. And what no one saw, God saw clearly. Chapter 2, Loyalty when it didn't benefit you. Chosen one. Loyalty sounds beautiful until it's tested in silence. It's easy to be loyal when it comes with applause. It's easy to stay when there's recognition, support, and open doors. But the real test of loyalty isn't in celebration. It's in obscurity. You found yourself standing in rooms that no longer felt warm, supporting people who never said thank you, holding on to assignments that drained you, not because you were weak, but because you knew they were God-given. There were moments you questioned if you should stay. Moments you attempted to walk away and protect your peace. But something in your spirit kept whispering, this isn't about comfort. This is about covenant. Loyalty is more than being there when it's convenient. It's being rooted when everything around you is shifting. It's staying true to the call when the circumstances are screaming for you to quit. You stayed when you had every right to leave. You didn't get credit for it. No one posted about your endurance. But heaven was recording every moment. You remained loyal when doors slammed shut in your face. You stayed faithful when people turned their backs on you. You held your post when the instructions no longer made sense. Even when God felt distant. Even when the reward felt delayed. Even when it looked like others were winning while you were forgotten, you stayed. And that kind of loyalty cannot be taught. It can only be proven. You didn't remain because you were trying to impress people. You didn't keep going because you were trying to be the hero. You weren't waiting for someone to clap for you. You stayed because of alignment, because your spirit knew something your emotions hadn't caught up with yet. Others might have thought you were being passive, that you were wasting your time, that you were being too nice, too forgiving, too quiet. But they didn't know that your restraint was prophetic. They didn't see that your endurance was obedience. They didn't understand that your loyalty was a weapon, one forged in trust, not ego. You weren't being held back. You were being held steady by God. Because there's a version of you that can only emerge through sustained obedience, through unwavering commitment, through loyalty that costs you something. And heaven takes that loyalty seriously. Because when you stay true in hidden places, God can trust you with visible ones. When you remain anchored without benefit, God knows you're not chasing blessings, you're chasing Him. This is why you're about to be rewarded in ways that don't make sense to others. Because the loyalty they questioned is the loyalty God just approved. You didn't stay for gain. You stayed for God. And now He's about to show the world why loyalty like yours is never wasted. Chapter 3. Silence when you could have spoken. Chosen one. There is a type of strength that rarely gets celebrated. And that's the strength to stay silent when you have every reason to speak. You had the truth. You had the evidence. You had the right. You knew what happened. You knew what was said. You knew how things were twisted and how your name was handled carelessly in rooms where you weren't present to defend yourself. You could have aired it all out. You could have corrected the narrative. You could have told your side, exposed what was done in the dark, and demanded justice. But you didn't. And that choice wasn't made out of weakness or fear. It was made from a place of sacred wisdom. You stayed silent, not because you didn't feel the weight of it, but because you understood something deeper. You understood that sometimes silence is the highest form of trust. You understood that when God is your defender, your only real job is to stay in position. You knew that if you opened your mouth prematurely, you might interfere with what heaven was arranging behind the scenes. So you stayed still, not bitter, not resentful, not vindictive. You stayed quiet. You stayed focused. You stayed aligned. What others saw as passivity was actually spiritual discipline. What others assumed was indifference was actually your commitment to peace. They didn't see the war you were fighting to stay grounded, to stay graceful, to keep your heart pure. God saw every moment you chose to keep your dignity instead of reacting in pride. He saw the nights you replayed the conversations, the betrayals, the misunderstandings, and still chose silence over self-defense. He saw how hard it was to swallow your words when your flesh begged you to speak. He saw how you refused to match their energy, even when your name was dragged without mercy. And that silence has become one of the loudest declarations of who you really are. It spoke of your character. It proved your maturity. It shouted your strength without making a sound. There is a silence that crushes lies without ever naming them. There is a silence that positions you for divine elevation while others are busy trying to win arguments. There is a silence that becomes your signature in heaven, a sign that you're ready for what can't be taken away. You didn't choose silence because you had nothing to say. You chose it because you had something greater to protect, your peace, your purpose, and your position with God. And now the same God you allowed to speak for you is about to answer on your behalf. Not just with words, but with evidence, with results, with doors that no one can close, with favor that no one can deny, with opportunities that no one can claim they gave you. He's about to speak your name in places you never defended it. He's about to answer questions you never explained. He's about to restore everything your silence was tested for, and more. Because when heaven speaks, the noise of man fades into nothing. You trusted God with the last word. Now watch him use it to write the next chapter of your life, one that no one will be able to rewrite, question, or cancel. All because you chose the higher road. All because you passed the test of silence. Chapter 4. Tears that watered your assignment. Chosen one. You need to understand something powerful about those tears you cried in secret. They were never wasted. They were not just emotional reactions. They were spiritual offerings. They were liquid prayers. Every tear that fell from your face landed in a place that mattered in the spirit. Every single one carried weight in heaven. You weren't just weeping out of pain. There's an anointing attached to your tears. Not because you were pied, but because you endured. Because you trusted. Because you held on, even when it didn't feel fair. Get ready, chosen one. What you wept over is going to manifest. What you prayed through is going to prosper. What you survived with tears, God is about to crown with glory. Your tears were not a sign of weakness. They were the evidence of spiritual strength. And now what they watered is about to bloom. Chapter 5. You didn't lose. You outlasted, chosen one. Let's get something straight. You didn't lose. Even though it looked like you were losing. Even though it felt like things were falling apart. Even though from the outside, people assumed you were done. But heaven knew better. Yes, you lost some friends. Yes, you lost opportunities. Yes, you lost time, sleep, and pieces of yourself that you'll never get back. But none of that means you lost the war. Because what you were really doing was outlasting the test. You weren't being destroyed. You were being forged. You weren't falling behind. You were being set apart. You weren't being punished. You were being positioned. Many started this journey with you. Some walked beside you when it was easy. Some celebrated you when it was convenient. But when the fire hit, when the pressure increased, when the spiritual climate shifted, they couldn't take it. Some faded without a word. Others folded under the weight. But you remained. Not because you had all the answers. Not because you were the strongest in the room. But because deep down, your spirit knew that this was never about speed or spotlight. This was about stamina. It wasn't a race of talent. It was a war of perseverance. God wasn't testing your performance. He was proving your endurance. Heaven wasn't checking how loud you could shout when everything was going well. He was watching how long you could keep going when nothing made sense. And you did. You outlasted the storm. You stayed through the night. You remained faithful when it felt like faith wasn't working. You kept walking when the path disappeared. You kept believing when the evidence told you to stop. They said you lost. But now that the smoke is clearing, they'll have to admit you're still standing. No, you're not the same. You've got some scars now. You've got some lessons written in pain and processed through silence. But you're still here. And you're not just here. You're wiser, stronger, and more spiritually sharp than you've ever been. Because surviving doesn't always look like winning to the world. But in the spirit realm, surviving a divine test means promotion. God wasn't trying to embarrass you. He was trying to expand you. He let the storm come not to drown you, but to train you how to breathe under pressure. He allowed the heartbreak, the delay, the betrayal, not because he was punishing you, but because he was pruning you for more. And now, because you outlasted what tried to take you out, you are ready for what others couldn't carry. This next season isn't going to reward the loudest. It's going to elevate the ones who stayed. The ones who didn't walk away. The ones who kept showing up with broken hearts and tear-stained faces. The ones who didn't lose. They outlasted. And that's you. Not by might, not by power, but by spiritual grit and God's hand. You've made it. And now heaven is about to crown you for what you survived in silence. Chapter 6. Heaven kept the score. Chosen one. Not everything you've done was supposed to be seen by the world. But make no mistake, heaven saw it all. There were moments when you felt invisible. Moments when your service went unthanked. When your prayers felt like echoes. When your sacrifices seemed to vanish into thin air. You gave. You showed up. You poured out. And in return, you often received silence. But let this truth settle deep in your spirit. The world may not have acknowledged it, but God never missed a moment. They didn't see you pick up the pieces when everything fell apart and still give God your yes. They didn't see you stay up all night praying over your family, fasting for clarity, weeping over your purpose, standing in the gap for people who didn't even know they were on the edge. They didn't see how hard it was to keep going. They didn't see the inner battles, the moments you wanted to quit, the heavy burdens you carried with a quiet smile. But heaven did. Heaven doesn't just watch. It records. Every act of obedience was written down. Every time you stayed loyal to people who left you behind. Every time you honored God's instructions while others dishonored you. Every time you chose purity in a culture that rewards compromise. Every time you said no to bitterness and yes to love. Every time you served without recognition, gave without applause, prayed without proof. Heaven kept the score when it looked like nothing was moving. Heaven kept the score when you sowed in drought. When you praised in pain. When you waited in silence. God is not a distant judge who forgets the quiet faithfulness of his chosen. He's not blind to your tears or deaf to your whispered prayers. He is watching over his word in your life, carefully keeping track of the seeds you've sown in secret, seeds of loyalty, humility, restraint, compassion, obedience, and surrender. You are never forgotten. You are being measured. You are being weighed in the spirit and found faithful. You are being trusted with more, not because of your performance in front of people, but because of your posture before God. And now heaven is moving. There are blessings coming with your name on them. And they didn't come through manipulation or connection. They came through consecration. There are doors opening, not because you knocked loud enough, but because your life was aligned. There are opportunities being released, not because you worked your way into rooms, but because you stayed obedient when nobody saw you. Heaven's reward is never random. God responds with precision. He is a just God. He saw what was unfair. He saw what you endured and how you handled it. He saw how you stayed clean in dirty environments. He saw how you were lied on, left out, misunderstood, and still didn't lose your posture. Now the reward is coming. Not a handout, but a divine inheritance. Not a coincidence, but a calculated release. Not a lucky break, but a spiritual repayment for everything that was recorded in silence. Chosen one, God is about to reward you publicly for what you endured privately. He's about to vindicate your loyalty, validate your process, and honor your purity. Your quiet faithfulness has reached heaven's courtroom. And the verdict is in your favor. You didn't need to shout. You didn't need to defend yourself. You didn't need to prove your worth. Heaven kept the score. And now God is writing the next chapter of your life in bold, undeniable favor. Chapter 7. Now the elevation begins. Chosen one. This is the moment your soul has been pressing toward. Even when your mind didn't understand it and your heart felt too heavy to keep going. You didn't just survive something. You passed something. And not the kind of test that man can evaluate with metrics or grades. This was a test of heaven. A test that required more than answers. It required character. It required surrender. It required loyalty in the dark, silence when slandered, and faith when there was no feeling. You didn't pass this test through performance. You passed it through posture. A posture of worship when things went silent. A posture of humility when pride would have been easier. A posture of patience when the weight got painful. A posture of purity when compromise was calling your name. Loyalty. Silence. Tears. These became your offering. You carried them when it cost you friends, when it delayed your reward, when it stripped your ego. And through it all, you never let go of the hand of God. While others were watching your steps, God was measuring your spirit. While others were asking why you hadn't arrived yet, God was preparing a level that required this kind of depth. He wasn't just preparing the table. He was preparing you to sit at it. And now comes the divine exchange. This next elevation is not about trying harder. It's about stepping into what's already been written. It won't come through effort alone. It will come through evidence, evidence of obedience, evidence of refinement, evidence that your yes carried more power than you ever imagined. You're about to be elevated in a way that's undeniable. Not because of branding or connections, but because of divine endorsement. You're being raised by the hand of God Himself. And no man can manufacture or manipulate what heaven is about to reveal. You're not just being restored. You're being revealed. What was done in private is now about to echo in public. Those who dismissed you are about to see why God preserved you. Those who counted you out are about to witness God counting you in, publicly, powerfully, and prophetically. Not as revenge, but as revelation. Because your life is about to speak what your mouth never had to say. Your breakthrough is going to explain your silence. Your favor is going to validate your faith. Your fruit is going to confirm what God has always known about you. This is not just promotion. It's divine recognition. This is what happens when someone stays faithful in obscurity. When someone serves without platform. When someone weeps in secret but never stops walking. You passed the hardest test. You passed when no one applauded. You passed because you trusted God more than your emotions. And now the elevation begins. This is your time, chosen one. Not because you shouted the loudest, but because you remained loyal, pure, and obedient when no one else was watching. Get ready. The doors are opening. The reward is being released. Heaven just gave you the highest grade, and now earth is about to see it.